So as everybody is coming back in, I'll tell a little story from the first MedtechVision. How many people in the room were at MedtechVision 2011? Okay, we have a lot of new people. Okay, the most popular part of MedtechVision 2011 was the CEO panel. I mean, by far. I mean, when we surveyed people afterwards, they were like, whatever you do, don't ever take away the CEO panel. What, of course, do? We took away the CEO panel. Not really, but we changed it up every year so that we could get different aspects of the voice of the CEOs in our industry to try and understand, A, how they think about where we are as an industry, B, how they do their job, and sometimes C, how they did what they've done, right? Because not everybody wants to be a CEO, but a lot of us do. I'm first-time CEO this year, and I can tell you that it's, thank you, Lynn Edwards. Thank you. And I can tell you, it's in some days you feel like you're everybody else's note taker and errand runner, because on any given day, that's my job, right? To do whatever it takes to get the business objectives met on that given day, no matter what it is. And so I have a lot more respect than I ever did for all my prior CEOs. And so we thought it would be fantastic to do an interview one-on-one with one of our favorite mentors and leaders in Bay Area biotech and medtech, which is Kim Popovits. And Susan Stimson is another one of my favorite people, who is, by the way, doing double duty here today because she has a board offsite in the conference room as you came in for Intersect ENT, and so she is running back and forth doing board and investor relations for what is now a public company. And she's going to interview Kim and set us off in our CEO interview for MedtechVision 2015. Take it away, Susan.
Thanks, Deb. And it is my absolute pleasure to, as our first fireside chat CEO interview, how did she do it, be here with Kim Popovits. Kim is a true paradigm changer in healthcare. And I know our theme today is about women's health. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but a lot about the decisions that Kim's made and how she's developed as a leader here today. Today she serves as President, CEO, and Chairman of the Board for Genomic Health, where over the past 13 years, she's led a revolution in genomic-based diagnostic care focused on cancer. And 13 years leading the company from early stage through becoming public, through now 500,000 patients in over 90 countries benefiting from all the work that she's done in the company and the team that she's led to do it. Prior to joining Genomic Health, she was at a little biotech firm called Genentech. And in her 14 years there, leading sales and marketing, she launched over, I think, 15 products, including another little drug for breast cancer called Herceptin. So, talking about the women in clinical trials and women as consumers, Kim's a true expert in that. And we'll dive into, again, a little bit of that, but we want to talk about her background as a leader. She also sits on numerous boards, including the California Life Sciences Foundation. She's a president of 21st Century Health. And one of your board positions is also on the ACLA, the Laboratory Testing Association, as well as and personalized medicine. So she's truly led this revolution over the past 14 years. And so one of the things that, and by the way, this please interactive, raise your hands anytime. We'll also have time for formal Q&A, but this is a discussion based on what all of you would like to learn. So, looking back at how your career has progressed to date, maybe talk through one of your decisions in particular, which was going from a very successful, high-profile role at Genentech and then making the jump over to Genomic Health. And can you talk a little bit about how you thought through that decision, and then maybe in general we'll talk a little bit about how you make choices throughout your career.
Yeah, maybe one way to think about that move, and as I look back on it, it was a bit similar to the move I made when I left pharma and went to biotech. So I never thought about myself necessarily as a visionary or entrepreneur in the way that I had defined it, looking at others. But I did see trends, and I did have aspirations to do things that had not been done before. So I remember when I made that move out of big pharma into biotech, it was very early years. It hadn't been proven. People thought it was, crazy, and that's Star Wars, and biotech is, it's risky. And I thought, yeah, but, I'm young, and I want to do something that could really change the world. And while I knew the path I was on in pharma was a good one, I was already in management, and I kind of knew the next few steps I'd be taking, it was a little more obvious. And, moving to Genentech was a big, scary move for me. But I thought, why not do it now? I'm young, and if it doesn't work out, I'll go back and I'll work in pharma. And a similar thing happened when I made the move to Genomic Health. So there I had been in biotech for, almost 15 years. And it was quite a journey, right? So there were a number of years in there where biotech people thought wouldn't make it. We had a couple of good products at Genentech. Then we had a few years where pipeline wasn't putting out a lot, and then there was all the controversy over monoclonal antibodies and whether they could ever really be drugs. And so it wasn't all fun. There was probably a 10-year period in there where a lot of people, just said, this it's not going to work. We came here to do this big thing, and it's taking too long. And we had all the interactions and discussions as we did with Roche, and everybody knows how that turned out. But when the genomic health opportunity came my way, my first thought was, why would I want to go into diagnostics? I thought about the last blood test that I, had gotten and thought that doesn't seem so interesting to me. But I had just gone through the Herceptin experience. And I was thinking about the pipeline at Genentech at the time, and we had all these targeted therapeutics, and I thought, well, the same thing is likely going to happen with them. If we can't figure out which patients are likely to respond based on a diagnostic approach, we may not get the trials done. The drugs may never see the light of day. And I didn't see a world where, launching really high-priced drugs with 20% response rates was going to be a value proposition that could be sustainable. And so when I talked to my colleagues at Genomic Health about what they were trying to do, I had that same feeling again, like, wow, if this could be possible, then that really fundamentally changes how we not just treat cancer, but how we start looking at, better diagnosis of disease up front before we start throwing lots of treatments at patients. And so it was that same feeling that made me think, I want to be a part of this. And it was scary because, once again, I went back to some of my colleagues at Genentech, who I have enormous respect for, and said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And some of that feedback was, Kim, no, that's probably 10 years off, and I don't know how you'd ever get that paid for, and what would it cost to develop a test like that, and the world's not ready for it, kind of thing. And I actually think they were right, by the way, because I think I would say today still that Genomic Health's vision was probably 5 to 7 years ahead of its time. And again, you've got that decade of trying to prove that a new business model could work, and we see what happened with biotech. And my belief, and I think we're seeing it today, is the same thing's going to happen in molecular diagnostics. Genomics and genetics, we're just seeing so much more of it now, and the importance of it in managing wellness and disease.
Excellent. And when folks that have worked for you have come to you for counsel on, I've got path A and path B, and neither of them might be bad. Hopefully it's two good options. How do you help people think through career decisions, whether, even if it's within different areas of your company, or maybe they've come to you thinking of doing something different?
I think that, as you help others sort out the conversation that I was having in my head during those decisions and with others around me, I always am interested in, what is the difference that you want to make? I mean, what is it that when are you happiest? What are you doing? And what is it about either opportunity that is causing us to have this conversation? So is it something that is lacking in the current role that you're in, or do you see something that's exciting going forward that you want to be a part of? And then what part of it do you want to be? And then I think there's also the part about how much risk do you want to take? How much risk can you afford to take? I mean, and that's an important conversation, right? Because I've talked with people that, maybe are thinking about doing something really risky, but, is it the right time in your career, in your life to do that? What are the responsibilities that you have outside of work? How much pressure does that put on you? Is this really the right time to do it? Is this the right opportunity for you to do it? So I think being really honest with yourself. Promotion always sounds good, new titles sound great, wow, I get to be. But then, kind of really asking yourself, why would I want to be that? What is it that's causing me to go in that direction? I was never really enamored by just a new job to have a new title, or, as much as we all want to financially do well and progression is great. For me, I really focused a lot on what's the problem I'm solving and what I'm doing every day? Who are the people I'm working with and doing it? And how much do I feel like it's going to matter? And what kind of difference is it going to make, to society or to something that I care about? And that probably sounds a little bit, apple pie-ish, but I don't think that that's hard to do. I think that if you really, think about what you're passionate about, there's lots of opportunity. Some of it might seem more exciting to others or not, but that didn't really bother me. Like when somebody would say to me, like, I just don't think that the genomic health model is going to work. It's like, okay, well, I'm glad to have that opinion, but I don't believe it. I want to try. So it doesn't hinder me, and I try not to do that with other people too, like to squelch somebody's dreams, right? If you really believe in it and it's important to you, then even trying it and failing is better than never having tried it.
Great, and I don't know if you've met Leslie Trigg, but if you're interviewing with her, she might ask you, what if you had a superpower, what would it be? Everybody wants to know.
So, I think I probably, my opinion on that has changed over the years. I think there would be a point in my life I would have said I wanted to be able to predict the future, and now I'm like, no. I'm like more into live in the moment, be present. Who cares what's gonna, somebody once told me something very wise. He said, Kim, all the things you worry about almost never happen, and it's the stuff you forget to worry about that does. So I really try to get myself, and it's so true, right? Like, it's like, dang, I was so worried about this, and that never happened, and forgot to even think about this other thing. I would probably say two things. One, I'd love to be able to not have to sleep. So, I mean, we all would like more time in the day, right? So I know I'm not going to change the 24-hour clock. I don't know, maybe that's possible too. But yeah, I always say, gosh, these people that can get by on like 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night, I would just love to be able to do that. So that'd be a superpower. The other one, though, that I think of is, and others would probably say, "Ooh, that could be dangerous." There's the one I would change is I don't necessarily think I have to know exactly what's going to happen in the future. In fact, I think it's exciting to not know. But I would maybe like to be able to be a mind reader. And the reason I say that is because I think about how much time you waste trying to figure out what somebody's really thinking, right? You're in a meeting, and you can tell there's just around the table, it's like, okay, I know everybody's not on board, but I don't know why. If I could just read their minds, I could get this done so much faster, right? So yeah, I think I'd pick mind reading.
I love it. So when did you realize you had a knack for leadership? Because you were senior VP at Genentech, and you've obviously COO, CEO, president, chairman of the board. When did it click that I'm good at that?
I think it took me a while, to be honest. I had a number of roles in management, kind of moving up into director levels, and I think I probably thought, okay, I'm a good manager. I know how to get things done through others. I like to build teams. I enjoy others' success. I think, I can inspire people when I'm really, passionate about something. And then the leadership piece, I think, came later for me, and really kind of thinking about what leadership is relative to management, because it is very different. And I think that getting to a point where I realized that my job as a leader was really to create momentum, to be able to inspire a vision and get work done through others, and not do it myself. And I would say it wasn't until I was in a pretty senior role at Genentech did I really start to get it. And I think I started to get it when I would put other people in leadership roles and I could see how it would work or maybe not work. And I think, okay, well, what did I miss there? Because they were really great at sales, or they were really great as a manager, but then you got into a broader role. And I think some of that comes from comments that were just made about, as you become a leader at a higher and higher levels, you're less relied upon to do a core competency that you once were relied upon to do, right? So, giving up that I was going to be the best sales manager or sales leader to become a COO or a CEO, your job changes. So you really don't get accolades for being a great salesperson at that point. You've got to be a great leader across a lot of functions that you don't even know anything about. And I think what I started to realize, because people told me a number of times, was that one of my greatest skills was being able to make good decisions. And I thought, that's interesting. So that seemed kind of obvious to me that as a leader you'd need to make good decisions. But then I would look around and I'd think, well, okay, there are a lot of people that get into that broad role. And if it was decision around sales and marketing, that was easy for me. I had done it, I'd been in every one of those positions. But if it was decision that was around research, development, any other aspect, operations, the lab of the company, where, quite frankly, I didn't know anything about those things when I took on and grew into these roles. And I think those decisions, you still have to make them as a CEO or as a COO or as a leader across various functions. And you have to be comfortable getting enough information, but not all the information that you might want, and then make a decision and be accountable for it and follow through. So I think that was when I realized that difference in the accountability, the decision making, the judgment that you need as a leader, on top of being a great manager and rolling your shirt sleeves up and getting in and doing anything that needs to be done in any given day. I thought that's a skill set that I probably took for granted. But that's, and I always try to point that out to people too. It's like things that you take for granted that you do well probably are real assets that you want to make sure you pay attention to.
Yeah, interesting. And then you realize it clicks. You make good decisions. How did you let other people know? I mean, some of it's, doing, you mentioned, putting your head down, doing a good job, that gets recognized. But sometimes promoting your talents, is something that we need to do and is not comfortable for everyone.
Yeah.
So how did you get others to recognize that you're really good at making decisions and that, which means you're right, when a lot of times not everybody wants to hear that you're right. A lot.
Well, and I will say we all know this. I mean, good decisions it doesn't necessarily mean you're right. I've made plenty of what I would call good decisions where I was completely wrong. It's exactly not the outcome that I wanted. But I think the point is that I call it a good decision because you brought the right people to the table. You listened and you went out and you got as many facts as you could at that time, and you made the best decision that you could. So, but to me, a bad decision is one where you don't consult the right people, that you're not in touch with what you need to be in touch with to make an educated decision, and you don't recognize it, or you recognize it and don't care, which is even worse. So I think, making those decisions, and hopefully you're right more than 50% of the time. I always said I'd like the weather person's job. They don't have to be right and they keep their jobs, but and they have all that new technology now too. But I think that the short answer to your question is, how did I get people to recognize that? I think bottom line was just results, right? So when you deliver and you consistently deliver, and it comes down to that, I think to tell people you're great at something, that's fine, but when you deliver results, that it gets recognized. Now, especially at a senior level, and I think sometimes what doesn't happen in organizations, and I try to pay attention to this at Genomic Health, and when we do our talent reviews, is I want to know the type of results that individuals are delivering in the company at all levels, because I do think they can get buried, right? So oftentimes, you can have a great win, but you don't take time to recognize, at what levels were decisions being made that created this opportunity and this possibility where we have this big win, because I do think they can get buried. And so what I'd say to people is, make sure when you are a part of something that's a big win and a great result, that you get recognized for being a part of it. And that's different than just saying, I'm a great leader, or I'm this. I was involved in X and I contributed to this project, because you can get lost easily, especially in large organizations.
And as the head of a large organization, how do you how do you recognize people at these various layers in the decision process that lead up to the big things that you see at the CEO level?
Well, we have a lot of opportunities in our culture to reward success and to reward things, and I don't call them simple things, but just things around upholding our values and contributing to our culture and to our community. So there's a lot of recognition that takes place daily. We have bobblehead programs and button programs, and they're actually very, very meaningful to employees. In fact, every time we have a visitor to Genomic Health, they'll inevitably say, "What are all these bobbleheads around everybody's cubes and offices?" And I said, "Oh, and they are displayed proudly."
Do you have the Kim Popovits bobblehead?
Well, I'm afraid they're going to do that one day because it was exactly something that would happen, and I've begged them not to. So I hope not. But we have a lot of fun ones, and it's just really a way to recognize outstanding contribution on a fun way and in a daily basis. But then, to me, there's a more serious thing. We have a talent review quarterly, and we go through the organization. It's the high potential, high performance at all levels. I personally want to know, from management on up. I enjoy, hearing about everybody in the organization, but it's just something that I think we have to remain committed to, because it's in those conversations that are really rich. this takes a full day to do this, right? So we will do like 2 half days of just reviewing the talent at Genomic Health and talking about, what is somebody currently doing, what opportunity does the manager feel they have to move, how in 18 months, in 3 years, is it 2 positions, 3 positions, what do they desire to do, when's the last time you had a career conversation with them? So we spend a lot of time on that.
Great. So our panels today have talked about, women. One talking about the women as a healthcare consumer. You've obviously, thought a lot about gender, given that Genomic Health focuses on breast, prostate, colon cancer, is my understanding, which of course impact both genders. Can you walk through some of the decisions or discussions that you've had specifically thinking about marketing to either men or women as patients, as consumers, as influencers in the healthcare decision, or from your time at Genentech as well, since that was a big deal there as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, when you mentioned it earlier, it got me thinking, our company is half women, so we're over, I think it's actually over 50% of Genomic Health is female. And it wasn't necessarily a goal in terms of a percentage, but my personal feeling is if you're interviewing the whole pool of candidates, you should have 50% women, right? At least. So we do, and that's wonderful. And I do think that's made a difference in when I think about how we do the work we do, both in marketing, our patient advocacy work, our direct-to-patient education, all of those things. So if you were to go and look at our website, you would see a very gender-focused approach to how we market and educate around our products. And I think the team has done a phenomenal job, and we work with, with outside groups to help us there. But in breast cancer, it's been a very, it's an individual campaign. We've used scarves. We've brought patients into, chat rooms. We've got a number of coach sites. And if you go through them, they're very warm, and they're very engaging, and they're very much directed at women, because breast cancer is predominantly a women's disease. Now you shift to prostate cancer, and I remember conversations in prostate cancer around how do we go and do that same sort of work and do the education around the need in prostate cancer. And when you look at what happens, the conversation in prostate cancer, it is the man who is generally, middle-aged, if not a little older, but the wife is often very involved in the conversation and the treatment. So on that one, we wanted to kind of do it both ways. Right now, in breast cancer, it really is the woman that's diagnosed, right? And I think in prostate cancer, we wanted to create the awareness among men, but we wanted to have a campaign that would reach to family members and especially spouses and caregivers, et cetera, in prostate cancer. And I think you'll see that there. So in prostate cancer, we actually did a theme around baseball, and we used Joe Torre, who has had prostate cancer. And when we selected Joe Torre among a list of people we could have used that were had celebrity status, that had prostate cancer, that were interested in getting the word out. And what we loved about Joe Torre, having met him, and he's a guy's guy and he's a gal's guy, right? He's just everybody. He resonates with both sexes. He's very passionate about educating in prostate cancer. The way he comes across is not, just athletic and a guy and a baseball manager, but it's a very warm, and I think we just absolutely, and I use the analogy all the time, hit it out of the park, the baseball one, with him, because, and it wasn't just because, it is because of him, but the way I watched our team work with Joe and his agent and his team to create what we all wanted to have happen here, that's what created the results. So it really was thinking about our audience. We want this to resonate with the man that just got diagnosed, and we want it to resonate with their spouse or their significant other that's going to help them manage through this treatment. So we had to kind of hit it at a point that didn't swing too far one way or the other.
Great. And did you ever have a campaign that just kind of missed the mark, when it comes to gender, or maybe that was a specific example of it really hitting and finding someone that resonated with both? We had some good examples earlier of just thinking about product development or design or marketing to or ads. I think it was the bipolar disorder. Is that the one I showed earlier? And it showed women with buying things you don't need and not sleeping, and the comments made up like,
I do that all the time.
Oh, we must all have bipolar disorder. Yeah.
That's therapy, I thought. Yeah. I'd like to say every campaign I've ever been involved in has been perfect, and no, it's not. And I think when we miss, we miss sometimes with it's underappreciating or not thinking through enough who your target audience is. And you go out and you create an ad that may be directed towards physicians about breast cancer and maybe about the overtreatment. And so are you talking to just physicians? Are you talking to female physicians? Are you talking to male physicians? Is the patient going to be involved in receiving any part of that education, communication, or that ad? And you end up sometimes, if you're not targeted enough, it isn't specific enough to anybody to change any behavior. And then if you're too targeted, but you let that piece move outside of that audience, then it can be things that could become offensive. I remember in the early days, we had a campaign that was very short-lived, and I remember at the time, a little bit worried about it when we were doing it, but it was around the overtreatment of breast cancer, and it was, I thought, on a fine line of insulting physicians, right? That you've been over-treating patients. Well, you have, but you've been doing the best you could with the tools you have, right? So you want to be careful that you're not offending or saying, you, doctor, have been over-treating. And the image was actually kind of a black and white. It was a very kind of scary image, a woman that had, been through chemo, had lost her hair, and it just felt dark. I guess that's the only word I could say about it. And I think what we missed on that one was we were trying to get a little bit of a shock factor, right? So this is a big problem. We're over-treating early stage breast cancer. But if you're left feeling dark and not hopeful, that's not what we wanted to get across. And then I think as we evolved into how could we do both? How can we create the awareness, establish that there's a huge unmet need here in the treatment of breast cancer, but still leave hope and a dialogue between physicians, patients, and genomic health ultimately.
Excellent. And then the other group that you market to essentially is the institutional investors, analysts, guessing majority male.
Yes.
Not a surprise, but changing hopefully.
Yeah.
Any who are female investors and either banking, VC in the room?
Couple.
All right.
Yeah, good.
Yay. So when you think about what have been your lessons learned in kind of marketing to that group, as you've been public since 2005,
Yeah.
so 10 years now, and what have you kind of learned in terms of marketing to that contingent?
I've been a little stubborn on this one because some advice I got early on when I presented the first time at one of the big investment conferences was I had this slide deck and it was pictures of our employees and I had some patient pictures and a couple patient stories, and I got advice that nobody wants to hear about that, Kim. I'm like, that's what we do. Yeah, but they want to know when you're going to be profitable and all of the, well, I get that, and they want to know when you're going to deliver value back to shareholders, and I was like, I get that too, but this is how we're going to do it. We're going to help patients like Diane be able to have an Oncotype score so she doesn't have to get chemotherapy and she doesn't get fired from her airline pilot job. That's how we're going to deliver value to patients and ultimately shareholders. And I got it, but I was really at the time thought, I want to change the conversation with the external world and investors in particular, because I think if they don't get what we're trying to do and they don't get the impact on patients, then they won't have the long-term view and maybe the staying power that we want them to have to follow us through, because this has been a journey, right? So we're a decade plus into this. We've been very successful, but it's still a business model that, there's a lot of questions around in the eyes of many analysts. So I think that from the early on, I think in that particular case, compromised and said, okay, I'm going to make part of the story about that, but each year I'm going to keep building a little bit more into it and talk about how we're doing this and hear the patient stories. And I actually think that that's caught on, not just because I did it, but others are doing it as well, especially in the world of cancer. And it has created, I think, a better dialogue, but it was a hard thing to do because you're right, it was mostly Wall Street men who wanted the spreadsheets and the numbers and the projections and whatever. And again, I get that, but I think we're starting to change just healthcare in general a bit, the conversation. And I actually had somebody at one of the conferences walk up to me, a complete stranger, and said, geez, I was walking down the hallway today and I happened to go into your presentation, and I got to tell you, you said it's the first presentation I saw where I actually knew I was at a healthcare conference where people were trying to help patients. And I thought, well, thank you. Can you tell my board that? Yeah, it's but again, knowing your audience, right? Because it would not be smart on my part to say, okay, I know you want to hear this, but this is what I want, so I'm gonna just talk about patients and employees and whatever. That would have been a disaster, right? You'd have disengaged a very important audience that you have in your business. So it was really about, I think starting out and meeting them 75% of the way and then kind of backing towards where I really wanted to take our story.
Oh, and what did you want to be when you grow up? Like when you were young, thinking way back?
Well, speaking of discouraging people, it probably was good. Now that I think backwards, but I wanted to be a teacher, and I think it was. I grew up in the Midwest, and the professions that I knew about were you were a dental hygienist, a teacher, a nurse, and it was all the obvious ones. And I wanted to be a teacher. And I still actually do. I love teaching. I always say maybe one day when I retire, I'll teach a course at a high school or college or whatever. But and I was talked out of it because the teaching market was flooded. It wasn't a great career. And again, it wasn't necessarily bad that I was, but it was like, okay, I get why that's probably not the smart way to go. But it is something that I always grew up wanting to be a teacher. Yeah. In some ways, I get to do that today, right? You can teach a lot of things. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a classroom at a...
Well, you're teaching today, so it is much appreciated. I'm sure you teach every day. Teach us a little bit about hiring. How did you learn how to interview and hire the right people? So... different depending on obviously the level you are in the organization, what you're hiring for. So I think I always separate hiring into kind of two pieces. One is, has somebody verified that the technical competencies are there, right? Does this person have the experience and the core knowledge we need for the position? And as CEO, I often assume, and of course we'll check, but that those questions are answered before I'm talking to somebody, right? That I'm not going to question whether you're really smart, got the right degree, that your experience is relevant for the position. But what I want to know is, what else can you do at Genomic Health? What else could you be doing in the future? How are you going to fit in our culture?
what kind of diversity are you going to bring to the company? How are you going to help us solve problems in different ways that we never thought about before? So I tend to, when I interview, it's really not a very traditional set of questions. I've actually had feedback before where people will walk out of an interview with me and go, I don't really know how that went. I mean, we had a great conversation, and I think she liked me. I think it went well, but I don't really know because those weren't the questions I was expecting. And what I always say to people, I just really want to get to know you. Because if I can understand how you think and how you treat people and how you make decisions in your life, right? So go back to, can you make good decisions? So when I'm talking to somebody about how did you decide to make that move in your career, what was going on in your world at that time? How did you balance the risk? How did you solve that problem? Did you have everybody aligned, or were you out on a limb by yourself? And how did you? So I really like to get into how people think, how they solve problems, how they'll fit into our culture. Do I want to work with them? Would I love to work for them? And I always tell people, when I hire people to a person, they are people that I would want to report to or should report to. I always say, I'd love it when I find somebody think, man, you should have my job. I should be reporting to you. And that's great, right? Because you have to have a succession plan for the organization. I do see people make the mistake often of hiring to be safe, right? I don't want to bring somebody in that's going to be too disruptive. Or I don't want to bring somebody in that will be competitive or perhaps even intimidate me. I love people that are smarter than I am. I got lots of them around me, and I learn from them every day, and it's just awesome. But I think that you have to be bold in the sense of diversity, but also bringing people in that have the smarts to take your job and the jobs of other people around you. And sometimes it's hard to do because it can be a little bit intimidating. The other thing is I think it's a danger to confuse somebody fitting in the culture and somebody that you like with somebody that will actually energize the culture, bring new ideas, right? So, we've hired people where I've thought, actually, boy, this is going to be interesting to watch, right? They're going to really shake things up. And they're not like everybody else on the team, and that's fine. I actually love that. What you wouldn't want, though, is somebody that doesn't share the values of the company. But that's just different. But the style, you want different styles. When I look at my own management team, we're very different. And I love how that works. But at the core, we have a tremendous passion for the business that we're in. We all came to it really wanting to make a difference in how cancer is treated, from personal experience to almost to a person. So that's a great starting point. So the core values and the rest of it kind of works, right? You challenge each other. We've got goofy people, and somebody's got a different style and whatnot, and we can make fun of it. And it really I think benefits everybody.
Excellent. Well, I have many more questions I could ask, but I wanted to make sure I open it up. Anyone have questions for Kim in particular, or think of them? I'm gonna ask one more question here. So you've driven the
question over here.
Oh,
yeah. Go ahead.
Is this working? Yeah. Great career, really awesome. Just from a management standpoint and a governance standpoint, the titles of CEO, President, and Chairman, how come you haven't separated some of that on your board?
I always tell people it simplifies decision making. It's a great question. So from a governance perspective, I think oftentimes you don't want your chairman and your CEO to be one and the same. We've had it that way at Genentech from the beginning. Randy was chairman and CEO. He eventually became executive chairman when I became CEO, and then when he moved on, I took on both roles. What we did do in that same time frame is we appointed a lead director. So we have a lead director on the board. I'm chairman and CEO. So I think it's an important discussion to have because you certainly don't want the appearance of conflict. One of the reasons that, we have a large inside ownership of Genomic Health, and one of the reasons that, Randy and I always felt that we wanted to keep the chairman position between one of the two of us is that, we have the opportunity to guide the company, you know, in a way by having that. And I think it's, you know, it's definitely a question that, and I don't know what the percentages are anymore, but I think they're moving more towards it's not a shared title. That one person doesn't have both titles, but very good question.
And as you've thought about growing the business from, you know, early stage, you know, your first year of revenue to your first 100 million in revenue to hundreds of million in revenue and almost $1 billion valuation, how did you think through the strategy, you know, of that company and moving from, you know, that early IPO through the next stage, and now I think your goal by 2020 $1 billion in sales. So how do you think about, how do you set those goals, and how do you know, orient the business to get there?
Well, this is where I think our team did a really good job of being honest with ourselves about how much runway we needed in terms of using the cash we had and going out and raising more money and taking dilution, et cetera. It's when you're in a new business model, one of the things that is hard is that there's nobody that's gone before you. So you don't have a recipe that's been, you know, it's not biotech, it's not pharma. You know, we don't get credit for doing a great phase 2 study. And in fact, it's the opposite. You know, you still have a world that, boy, is this business model going to work? What about regulation? What about reimbursement? Are payers going to pay? Is the FDA going to come in and regulate? What does that do to the industry? So there's still a lot of, I think, trepidation around just the whole field of genomics and genetics. I think that there's no longer a debate about how important it's going to be, but how it gets there, when it gets there, and who wins, I think is not as obvious. And so from an investment standpoint, there's still, I think, a lot of perceived risk around the business model. So when you have that, you don't want to get too far out ahead of yourself, right? So I think where a lot of companies that have come into our space have struggled is you can't go hire, you know, a 200-person sales force before you know whether you've got reimbursement and you've got this path to getting $300, $400, $500 million in revenue. So we've really had to, along the way, titrate how we use our resources in a way that I hadn't had to do, you know, in a long time. I can go back to just even the early years of biotech. And that's still important. As much as we're a decade into this, we still have a business model that requires very careful utilization of resources, probably more so than what you have in traditional tech or in healthcare, just from a drug model side.
Okay, great. Questions? Other questions? Looks like we've got one here.
Hi, I'm Colby. Hi, Colby. Thank you so much for your talk. Really great. It's amazing that you've stayed with the company through its growth, and I'm sure you've grown too. And I'm wondering, how do you stay fresh, and how do you sort of transition your own perspective as your company goes through different phases? Mm-hmm. Coming from a startup where we're also looking at commercializing, so big change. So curious to hear your thoughts.
You know, and I think you've all been in positions as you grow with your position and you watch a company grow. And I do think recognizing when it's time to move on, either because you have learned all you can learn, or perhaps the company is going into a different phase where you think my skill set maybe isn't the best skill set to take it forward. And I think those are conversations that are really hard for people to have. And again, it goes back to that, I'm not successful if I'm not just naturally progressing, and that's really not the case. So I always say, are you continuing to learn? Do you believe that you're continuing to add value? And, you know, so far into being a CEO at Genomic Health and for the last, I guess, 7 years now, I still feel like I'm growing every day, and I'm learning, and I'm providing value, and I'm helping to shape the organization and take it to the next level, the 2.0, if you will. But I don't know in 3 to 5 years, is my skill set the best to do what we need to do in that? And it's something I ask myself all the time. Because I look back to how when Randy and I made that transition back 7, 8 years ago, and when Randy came to me, and I have such respect for him in so many ways, but this was a really great learning, and he said, you know, Kim, the board and I both want you to be CEO. I want to move to executive chairman. And I said, oh God, no, don't do that. And I said, well, and I said, why? And he said, well, because, you know, here we are, we've launched a product. What matters now is that we build a commercial infrastructure, that we win in the market, that we get reimbursement, that we build managed care teams, that we know how to get all of this infrastructure built around a big commercial engine, and that's what you know, and that's what you do. And I thought at the time, well, that actually makes sense. And what he also said is, I don't know how to do that. And by the way, I don't want to do that, right? And that's what the focus of the company needs to be right now. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. And so I always looked at that discussion, and while I still had great, fear and trepidation going into the role, because there I was, a commercial person, I knew that's what the organization needed to focus on, but I would also be taking over the responsibility for R&D and operations and everything else, IT, that I had never managed before, and that's scary. The way I look at it is, there'll be a point in my career when I'm going to have that same feeling, like, you know what, this is just not, my skill set isn't the ideal skill set for the stage of the company, and be smart enough to say, okay, well then what value can I continue to have, or do I want to have, and make the decisions that's in the best interest of the company, of the patients, of the shareholders, because that's my job to do that, right? It's a conversation that I think you have to have with yourself all the time. And I don't see myself doing this for 20 years, right? So what is the succession plan, and how am I going to know when the right moment is to pivot?
Excellent. Other questions? Anyone?
Other one?
Over here.
You mentioned that Genomic Health has a high percentage of female employees. I'm wondering if that's true of your leadership team as well, and what's the driver either way?
Yeah, so our company, I actually should get these statistics, but our company is over 50% women, I believe, today. I know it's right at it, if not over. Leadership team is probably about the same. We have, there's 2 out of our 7 board members, myself and 1 other woman. My leadership team, there's 3 of us. I know in our director and our VP level, it's about half and half as well. So it's pretty consistent throughout the organization.
With the medtech industry being, obviously to all of us knowing, such a male-dominated industry, what career advice would you give to one, the tenured woman who's striving towards an executive position, but then also, a woman earlier on in her career in the industry?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing I would say, if you're thinking about advancement, what do you want to be and why? And the why thing is so important, right? So if you want to be a CEO, that's great, but really understand why you want to do it, right? If it's just so I can say I was a CEO, you might find yourselves, disappointed, right, when you get into the role. So understanding what the role is and why you really want it is really important. And I think that to women that are younger in the organization, the advice I consistently give them is, speak up, let people know what it is you want. I still think results rule, right? So, the best way to move forward is to bring in results and have others know that you've delivered those results. But definitely laying out what you want to do, and more importantly, why you want to do it. And then find mentors. Ask people to join you in a development plan to get there. And I do think that if I could say anything about what I try to get other women to do, and I wasn't good at it myself, was raising my own hand and saying, but I'm the one that made that happen, and that was my idea, and I built that strategy, and that was my PowerPoint presentation. I always had, I always felt like, oh, well, somebody will notice. Well, no, they won't notice often if you don't tell them. But you're telling them when you have a result or you have a success in hand, right? You're not just saying, hey, I'm good. This is what I did, and I want my name on it. And your managers, and we all as managers, many of you in the room are, we should be, working with women to make sure that that's happening. And I think we're getting better at it. I always used to say when I go in and negotiate a salary, I could negotiate like crazy for anybody on my team, right? And I remember back at, somebody said, one of my colleagues at one of our sessions at Genentech said, God, Kim gets every stock option grant she wants. They never get adjusted. thinking, well, sometimes I could adjust it up. But because I would really just fight for my people, but then I would never do it for myself. I'd get somebody to hand me a raise, I go, okay. And I get back to my office and think, oh, that didn't seem very good compared to like what I saw other places or whatever. And I would be kind of quiet about it. I think finding words to use when you're in a situation like that are really important, and helping people find those words. I had a gal come to me outside of my company, but really senior in the industry, and say, I got this issue with my compensation. I don't know how to address it. And I was like, wow, really, you? I mean, because she would be somebody that I thought, oh, she must really speak up for herself, whatever. And she was like, no, really. I said, oh, my goodness. So we had this long conversation about what words would you be comfortable with to say. You don't have to go in and say, I feel like I'm being, mistreated, and this isn't fair, and my compensation's too low. There's other ways to have the conversation, by asking questions or starting a dialogue to say, do you think this, represents blah, blah, so we really worked it through. And she called me like a month later. She goes, oh my God, she said, not only, it wasn't even hard. She goes, I had the conversation. He was really great. I ended up with a bigger raise than I even thought I was going to get. I learned so much about what the company thinks of me. I said, because you asked. And you found a way to ask that didn't make you feel uncomfortable. Because if you're having a conversation and you feel uncomfortable in your words, what's going to happen? They feel uncomfortable too, right? And it won't be as rich of a conversation. And as silly as it might sound, you're role-playing that stuff with each other. How have you done this? What did you say? Like what's one time where you actually went in and said, I'm done, can't take it anymore. I'm addressing this problem, and then how do you do it? And help people role-play those things. I did it yesterday. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, last night, it's an issue in the office, and one of the gals came to me and said, here's what's going on. What do you think? I go, okay, well, let's think about this. And I really enjoy that. And maybe that's the teacher coming out, but I ask people to do it for me. It's one advantage I actually think that women have. We have many, but over men. And I hate to do the gender thing, but there just are things and that are issues, and other things that are advantages. I think we're much better at letting down our guard and our feelings to say to somebody else, oh my gosh, how do you handle this? And I think sometimes men won't do that, right? Because it's an admission of, I'm not secure, or I'm not really confident here. And I think to be comfortable letting down that guard and not feeling like you have to know everything and always be tough is really, an important thing, and something that, boy, you can sure turn it to your advantage in learning and growing yourself.
Well, from everyone in the room, thank you so very much, Kim. It is a pleasure. And you are a true inspiration to everyone here, and we're so fortunate to learn from all you've learned.
And you all inspire me, so keep whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Believe in yourself.
And you are that good.
Yeah. And you are that good, yeah. So,
excellent.
thank you.
Thanks very much.